Hello and welcome. Welcome to all of you joining us here in Berlin and online via Zoom for our event Islands in a Global Ocean of Challenges on the occasion of the 4th International Conference on Small Island Developing States. My name is Oliver Hasenkamp. I'm working for the United Nations Association of Germany and will be the moderator for this event. Before we start with our distinguished opening speakers, please allow me to give you a few information. First of all, I regret that I have to inform you that His Excellency Fatu Manawa Oupolo Paolele Luteru, the permanent representative of Samoa to the United Nations and current chair of the Alliance of Small Island States, OSIS, unfortunately had to cancel his participation as an online speaker in our panel discussion today due to urgent travel arrangements. We regret that he's not able to join us today, especially given his expertise and experience, but also because it was our intention to have speakers from all major small island developing states regions present at this event. But I also would like to ask you for your understanding, particularly taking in mind the very limited capacities and resources of many small island developing states and also their permanent missions to the United Nations. And of course, we are grateful and we are glad to have many other very experienced, very knowledgeable speakers from small island developing states, from Germany and also from other countries with us today. Our first speaker in a minute will be Barbara Hendricks, the former Minister of the Environment of Germany. She is also a member of the Presidium of the United Nations Association of Germany. As you may have seen from the program, her remarks will be in German language. We do offer translated captions for those who do not understand German. If you're attending us here in Berlin, you can see the captions on the screen. And for those who are attending online via Zoom, please enable captions by clicking on the Show Captions button in your Zoom menu bar and then select German as speaking language and English as translated captions language. Barbara Hendricks' remarks will be followed by the opening statements from Their Excellencies Aishat Shan Shakir, the Ambassador of the Republic of the Maldives to Germany, and Craig John Hawke, the Ambassador of New Zealand in Germany. And we are looking forward to your welcome remarks, and we are very grateful for this cooperation. So Barbara Hendricks, we are very happy to have you here today, and I would like to give the floor to you as the first speaker. Barbara Hendricks, Sie haben das Wort.
Meine Damen und Herren, verehrte Anwesende, aus Anlass der 4. Konferenz der kleinen Inselentwicklungsstaaten, das ist ein deutsches Wort, was man eigentlich fast nicht benutzt, also der Small Island Developing States SIDS, eben diese 4. Konferenz, die UNO-Konferenz, wird nächste Woche in Antigua und Barbuda stattfinden. Ich darf Sie sehr herzlich begrüßen in meiner Eigenschaft als Mitglied des Präsidiums der Deutschen Gesellschaft für die Vereinten Nationen. Herr Hasenkamp hat eben schon darauf hingewiesen. Herzlichen Dank an die Botschaften von Neuseeland und der Malediven, die heute hier Mitgastgeber sind. Und die sind natürlich diejenigen, die eigentlich die echte Kenntnis haben. Malediven auf jeden Fall. Und Neuseeland, obwohl tausende Meilen entfernt, doch am nächstgelegenen. So muss man das wohl sehen. Es geht immer um tausende Meilen, wenn man von Nachbarn von uns Small Island Development States spricht. Die Nachbarn sind immer weit entfernt, außer den anderen Small Island Developing States. Die sind natürlich häufig nähere Nachbarn, aber trotzdem nicht gerade so um die Ecke, also so wie man sich das so in Mitteleuropa vorstellt, ist das auf jeden Fall nicht. Beide Länder übrigens, also die Malediven und auch Neuseeland, werden in der kommenden Woche die Verhandlungen auf der UN-Inselstaatenkonferenz leiten. Besonders herzlich kann ich daher begrüßen hier anwesend Ihre Exzellenz, die Botschafterin Aishat Shan Shakir, die die Malediven hier in der Bundesrepublik Deutschland vertritt, und seine Exzellenz Craig John Hawke, der Neuseeland hier in der Bundesrepublik Deutschland vertritt. Seien Sie uns herzlich willkommen. Meine Damen und Herren, ich freue mich über Ihr Interesse. Sie sind ja recht zahlreich hier erschienen und noch mehr Anmeldungen hat es gegeben bei der Online-Teilnahme über Zoom, wenngleich wir hier in Mitteleuropa, wir haben ja wirklich wenig Ahnung von den Small Island Developing States. Es mag unter Ihnen einige geben, die sich mit dem Thema schon mehr befasst haben, aber für die allermeisten auch von den hier Anwesenden werden es neue Themen sein und ganz bestimmt für fast alle Mitteleuropäer sind die Themen vollständig neu. Auch für mich war das nicht von Anfang an so bekannt, als ich Bundesumweltministerin wurde. Ich bin sicher eine von denen, die sich in der Welt schon immer ganz gut auskannte, aber in welcher besonderen Lage sich die Small Island Developing States befinden, ist mir erst mit den Jahren mehr deutlich geworden. Das weiß man nicht von Anfang an. Ich glaube, das darf man auch niemandem vorwerfen, wenn Mitteleuropäer das nicht so von Anfang an wissen. Aber wir wissen jetzt, dass eben die Small Island Developing States besonders vulnerabel sind, besonders natürlich leiden unter den Folgen des Klimawandels, insbesondere den damit verbundenen Ansteigen des Meeresspiegels, aber auch anderer Naturgewalten wie meinetwegen mehr Tornados oder andere Wetterereignisse, die einfach härter sind, als sie schon immer waren. Wenn sie denn immer mal wieder da waren, dann kommen sie heutzutage häufiger und sind härter. Und das ist natürlich eine Überlebensfrage für viele Bewohnerinnen und Bewohner der Small Island Development States. Da eben diese Länder besonders vulnerabel sind, sind sie auch besonders darauf angewiesen, dass wir, die Länder der nördlichen Hemisphäre, die gegebenen Zusagen, die wir auf der Pariser Klimakonferenz ja gegeben haben, dass wir sie auch einhalten. Zum einen sind wir verantwortlich für die Bekämpfung des Klimawandels in unserer Verantwortung in unseren Ländern, in Deutschland, in Europa, in Nordamerika, wo auch immer, gerade in allen industrialisierten Ländern. Dafür sind wir an erster Stelle verantwortlich. Aber wir sind auch dafür verantwortlich, dass in den Ländern, wo eben diese besonderen Herausforderungen bestehen, also gerade in den Small Island Developing States, nicht nur dort, aber dort eben auch in besonderer Weise, dass wir ihnen helfen, mit der Anpassung an den Klimawandel fertig zu werden. Das ist eben auch Gegenstand des Pariser Klimaschutzabkommens, ganz wichtig gewesen in der Verabschiedung im Jahr 2015, dass wir unsere Verantwortung einmal sehen in finanzieller Hinsicht, aber auch in der Hinsicht von Technologietransfer. Und zwar Technologietransfer, ohne dafür noch extra Gebühren, Patente oder sonst was zu erheben, sondern das zur Verfügung zu stellen, was wir können und was wir wissen. Also nach unseren Möglichkeiten, das ist ja sowieso das Prinzip des Pariser Klimaschutzabkommens, jeder muss nach seinen Möglichkeiten alles das tun, was er kann, um eben den Klimawandel zu bekämpfen und die Anpassung an den Klimawandel auch zu ermöglichen. Denn dass der Klimawandel stattfindet, ist ja nicht zu bestreiten und deswegen sind Anpassungsstrategien auch von sehr hoher Bedeutung. Dies waren die wesentlichen Zusagen im Pariser Klimaschutzabkommen, an die wir uns halten müssen im Verhältnis zu den Ländern, die eben in besonderer Weise betroffen sind und in der Regel sozusagen alle nicht den Klimawandel tatsächlich initiiert haben, sondern ausschließlich zu den Betroffenen und nicht zu den Verursachern gehören. Das machen sich manche Menschen nicht so klar und wenn wir jetzt hier oder da die ein oder andere Debatte hören, die im Zusammenhang mit dem Bundeshaushalt zu Fragen der Entwicklungszusammenarbeit zu hören sind, das erlaube ich mir dann mal. Ich bin ja im Ruhestand, da darf ich das sagen. So geht's nicht. Wir haben eine internationale Verantwortung. Herzlichen Dank. Your Excellency, the floor is yours. Wir haben die Botschafterin der Malediven, Aishat Sharon Shakir, die jetzt die Keynote halten wird. Pardon.
It's okay, thank you. Thank you, Excellency. Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Maldives, I'm pleased to join the United Nations Association of Germany and the Embassy of New Zealand in hosting this timely event. Today, we aim to explore the challenges faced by small island developing states, or SIDS, like the Maldives. The world for SIDS is threatening. SIDS are at the forefront of global challenges and remain extremely vulnerable to external shocks. The adverse effects of climate change impact not only our way of life, but also our very survival. Conflicts here in Europe, in the Middle East, and across the world continue to affect our economies disproportionately. Global crises such as the COVID-19 pandemic have also negatively impacted SIDS and their sustainable development journeys. Excellencies, the 4th International Conference on SIDS will commence in the beautiful country of Antigua and Barbuda in 6 days. I congratulate the host country, Antigua and Barbuda, on the pivotal moment for SIDS. The conference will provide a platform to discuss the pressing challenges and promising strategies in charting the course towards resilient prosperity for SIDS. Over the course of the last 6 months or so, negotiations on a new action-oriented, robust and forward-looking 10-year program of action for SIDS took place at the UN in New York. In the spirit of cooperation and collaboration, the program of action, or the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS, was agreed to by all countries. The Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS outlines the challenges we face, highlights what we want, and tells us how to get there. Excellencies, as we work to achieve the commitments outlined in the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS, allow me to make 3 points on what SIDS want from our partners in the developed world. First, SIDS want access to affordable and concessional finance. We believe that it is a moral imperative for developed countries to deliver on their commitments, increase support on climate finance, including for climate mitigation, adaptation, and addressing loss and damage. Like many SIDS, the Maldives is committed to integrating climate resilience strategies into all aspects of our development planning. Careful planning is not only driving the island's economy, but also safeguarding our environmental assets and serving as a defense mechanism against rising sea levels. The government of Maldives has pledged ambitious climate targets. At COP28, the President of the Maldives, Dr. Mohamed Muizzu, pledged to develop renewable energy systems that will generate 30% of the country's electrical needs by 2028. We also aimed to reach net zero emissions by 2030, having secured enough finance to reduce emissions by 26% by then as of now. Our efforts alone will not be enough. We need the support of our partners in the developed world, like Germany, to help us achieve our targets and to guarantee a brighter future for our people. Second, SIDS wants support to build resilience, to help us stand on our own feet, to instill confidence that we can navigate our development journeys. SIDS may not be the masters of their fate, but our smallness and our remoteness will not dictate our destiny. We want to be in charge of our own destinies. The Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS envisions a future for SIDS where solutions are SIDS-led and SIDS-owned. We ask our partners to see us not just as a country to provide aid, but as partners in achieving sustainable development which is mutually beneficial. Our partners can ensure this by supporting us in boosting our state and productive capacities, in other words, by supporting our ability to effectively implement programs, to build stronger institutions, to guarantee transparency and accountability. Third, SIDS want genuine partnerships, partnerships that prioritize values of equity and mutual trust and address our development concerns. For instance, when the Maldives graduated from least developed country status, we lost concessions from the EU on our sustainable fisheries products through the imposition of tariffs. We believe it is unfair to penalize SIDS for their development, especially when SIDS are recognized as a special case for sustainable development. Partnering with SIDS must be accompanied by tailored solutions. In this vein, let me express our appreciation to GIZ for supporting us in our Climate Smart Resilient Islands CSRI initiative. CSRI initiative, which is also open for other SIDS to join, can deliver holistic solutions to tackle climate change. We are delighted to work with GIZ in holding a side event on the CSRI initiative at the upcoming SIDS 4 conference. Excellencies, let us continue to support each other, learn from each other, and invest in a collective future where SIDS are not seen only as vulnerable, but as vanguards of resilience in sustainable development. Thank you.
Ina mana, ina reo, ina iwi, e rangatira mā tēnā koutou katoa. Warm Pacific greetings to you all, and it is rather warm here today. Can I please acknowledge first our co-hosts, the United Nations Association for Germany and the Embassy of Maldives, Dr. Hendricks, Ambassador Shakir, also Ambassador Webson online, and also Mr. Lowry from the Foreign Office. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and our online audience, it's great to be here today. I really want to start by commending the United Nations Association of Germany for bringing the islands to the capital of Berlin. Small island developing states and their partners, we're a close-knit group. And so it is truly wonderful to hear that on screen today we'll be joined by Ambassador Webson, who I enjoyed working with when I was in New York. We salute your SIDS leadership and wish you well for the conference in Antigua and Barbuda. My home, New Zealand, is a series of many islands, 2 large ones and many, many small islands. With our closest neighbours, which are also island nations, we share a vast ocean, one that gives us our livelihoods, our shared wealth, and our connection to the world. Therefore, it is very, very natural for New Zealand to see the United Nations Conference on Small Island Developing States as an important event for the international community. It's a once-in-a-decade event where small island developing states can be heard, their issues debated, and the international community support can be gathered. Since the last SIDS conference in 2014 and the Samoa Pathway, and despite progress in some areas, there's still a lot of work and support required to assist SIDS realise their social, economic, and environmental potential. And this is why this year's overarching theme for the SIDS conference of charting the course towards resilience prosperity will set an important path towards achieving sustainable development for some of the most vulnerable states on this planet. For New Zealand, Priorities at the upcoming SIDS conference include, firstly, improving access to finance and climate finance, and I was pleased Ambassador Shakir also mentioned that as one of their priorities for the Maldives. Retaining statehood with sea level rise. Making progress on the value and use of the multidimensional vulnerability index, and I'll come back to that shortly. Protection and sustainable development of ocean economies, strengthening SIDS data collection, and realising opportunities for progress on gender equality. To demonstrate our commitment, New Zealand is making a significant contribution to support the delivery of SIDS 4. This includes a package of support to Antigua and Barbuda to host the conference, as well as additional support to enable SIDS participation in the conference, secretarial support to negotiations of the conference outcome document, and research on SIDS debt sustainability issues. We're also working to support a substantive outcome for the conference. New Zealand co-chaired the 2024 SIDS Conference Preparatory Committee alongside the Maldives. We helped to shepherd the Antigua and Barbuda agenda for SIDS to a successful conclusion last month. The committee worked towards the next 10-year program of action for small island developing states, which was successfully concluded, as I said. We also will be supporting SIDS, particularly in the Pacific, which is a priority for New Zealand's development cooperation and climate financing efforts. But furthermore, we stand on the international stage to support the voices of SIDS when they seek our support. For example, New Zealand played a key role in supporting Vanuatu's leadership on seeking an advisory opinion on climate issues from the International Court of Justice. We support Tuvalu's co-leadership with Germany on the Champions of Sea Level Rise and its existential threats, also known as CSAT. In addition, the new Multidimensional Vulnerability Index highlights their exposure to hazards and crises. SIDS have asked for this more wide-ranging assessment for many, many years. SID countries that were thought to be on safe development trajectories are not as robust as we thought. Now we have this index. We may reassess how we allocate our funding and our ODA investments. We are intending to highlight the potential value of the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index at the SIDS conference. The burden of building and strengthening the necessary conditions for strong development of SIDS lies in the hands of everyone, irrespective of their geography. The number of attendees here today is an indication that there is widespread interest in sustainable development of small island developing states, even in the heart of Europe. Germany, as a G7 member and the second largest provider of ODA, can play a major support in supporting small island developing states issues. It is quality, not necessarily quantity, of engagement that matters. Germany and others can partner with New Zealand in this effort through development cooperation, climate finance, advocacy in multilateral and financial institutions, and more. Together, we can work towards a more resilient and prosperous future. As we say in New Zealand, he waka eka noa, we are all in this canoe together. And I wish the organisers a very successful conference and a very successful event this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellencies. Thank you, Barbara Hendricks, for these opening remarks. And I think you have already raised a lot of aspects that I would love to come back to during the panel discussion, even though, of course, we have to keep the time in mind, as there are so many interesting aspects to discuss about today from my point of view. I now have the honor to introduce you to His Excellency Aubrey Webson, the permanent representative of the SIDS-4 conference host country, Antigua and Barbuda, to the United Nations for a keynote on the SIDS-4 conference. His Excellency will join us online by video, and his keynote has been recorded prior to this event.
Good morning, good evening, and most of all, greetings from St. John's, Antigua Barbuda, home of SIDS-4 2024. Let me begin by expressing my appreciation to the colleagues from the Embassy of New Zealand, Australia, and our partners from Germany for organizing this important event. We are grateful for the opportunity to share with you information on SIDS relevance within the United Nations, our efforts for sustainable development, and information on the 4th SIDS conference scheduled to get started here in just over a week or so on May 27th. SIDS, as you know, stands for Small Island Developing States. We account for almost a quarter of developing countries, and despite our fragility and vulnerability, we are custodians of almost a third of the world's ocean ecosystem. Putting that together, it makes these groups of islands within our development and global family a very important part of the global network of nations. The Alliance of Small Island Developing States, which are the groups that is known these days as SIDS, came together around the issue of climate just over 30 years ago. This alliance became the moral conscience of the United Nations and forced its way into the consciousness of the global community in order to have the world reflect on the destruction of our globe or our Mother Earth because of our environmental degradation and the many challenges that we were creating due to our lifestyles on our societies. And the vulnerability of these islands became apparent as we were the sufferers. We bore the brunt of the global disaster on climate change. Over those 30 years or so, many promises were made to address climate change. However, I believe it might be arguably the state of the world in 2017 when we were hit by the first Category 5 hurricane, Antigua and Barbuda being one of the first countries to bear this unfortunate global incident brought about through our own making as a society, as a global community. This shock awoke the world to the imminent danger that island nations face as hurricanes intensity and cyclones intensity became greater. The COVID-19 pandemic further added to the disaster and vulnerability of these island nations. And any gains that were being made in the realm of development were dramatically set back by the global incidents that we all faced on the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw in that period how dependable upon each other and upon the wider communities of the global family that island nations became. As a result, the strength of the Alliance of Small Island States during the period 2020 to 2023 became much more apparent. Our efforts to bring the global's attention to transform and to understand the plight that we faced based on our fragility and the vulnerability of our member states became very apparent. And the United Nations began to pay attention, and we have now sustained this attention and built a momentum that the world understands that if we do not do something about our destruction of our world and reverse our carbon initiatives, reverse our use of oil, reverse the destruction that we are facing in the damaging of our seas and the total destruction of our environment, the damage that we are placing on our biodiversity. Unless we reverse these, some islands in the Pacific and in the Caribbean and amongst the oceanic states may not exist in years to come. It's a grim picture, but a reality, and a realistic one, that we as island nations understand all too well, and that the global community needs to take seriously. So you ask, how can we reverse these? We have developed as an international community, the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals, with its grandiose plans of leaving no one behind, does offer some hope. But that hope can only be materialized if we as a family decide to address the issues in a serious manner. The island nations have spoken about the promise to deliver through financial assistance to member states. We have spoken about the transformation of the structures and the relationship between the IFIs, international financial institutions, and the island communities. We have spoken openly about the need to begin to put limits and not to exceed our climate agenda, which was set in Paris. For us, staying alive is critical if we do not exceed 0.1 degrees. And that's the promise that we have put, and that's the ask we have made to our global community. Each COP, each SIDS conference, each discussion on SDGs, the islands, the vulnerability of island states feature heavily. We have asked that we move from a state of discussion into a moment of practice in order to enforce and protect and save island nations. That's why SIDS 4 is so critical and important. And that's why the attendance to SIDS 4 has caught the imagination of so many. SIDS 4 is celebrating the 4th meeting of the Small Island Developing States in order for us to develop an international strategic plan. This plan is done every 10 years. Started in 1994 and continued in 2004, 2014, and now we're here in Antigua and Barbuda. We believe that the next 10 years are critical. We believe so for a number of reasons. Firstly, we believe we have a momentum a momentum in saying the interests of the small islands are true, and the momentum that many have recognized that, and we are together. This momentum must be seized upon, and we must turn words into practice, and practice must deliver dreams into realities. We believe that the next 10 years are critical because we have to turn back or slow down the rate of degradation of our biodiversity, towards which we are heading, as we are seeing in the matters of sea level rise, along with the matters of climate change that brings about more increased and intense hurricanes and cyclones. We believe the next 10 years are critical because this is the time when the financial institutions got to find creative, innovative, and new ways that can help these small island nations get out of their current quagmire that we face as a result of the issues of the pandemic. It is for us a moment when we must address these problems, and we see SIDS 4 as such. SIDS 4 has laid out before us 5 major themes. Of course, the theme of the conference is addressing the question of resilience and prosperity. We have to be resilient in order to be prosperous. And that's why we came up with this theme, resilient prosperity. We will address the question of climate finance and how that reaches small islands. We will address the question of the restructuring of the relationship with the financial institutions and SIDS. We will address the question of data, because SIDS need to have and build the capacity of data in order to be able to address its policy and governance issues in a stronger and better way. We will address the question of partnership and finance and bring together the international financial community, OEDC, the development banks, etc., to work with the small islands in a way that can address their challenges. And finally, we will address the need for strengthening and developing human capital, and find creative ways to use human capital, whether they are on the shores of the islands or out in the diaspora, but all must lead towards the contribution of development strategies that can better the lives of persons living on the islands. So we hope that SIDS 4 will bring together the global community. Over 4,000 participants, it would appear, are registered to come to Antigua and Barbuda. And that's a significant number for a very small island. Significant participation from Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean and Latin America. We see the participation and this level of interest as the concern, the global concern on the plight of persons from small islands. And that's why we believe we are at a tipping point in the momentum and at a momentous moment of change for small islands. Put it all together, we believe that SIDS 4 will go down in history as the turning point, the tipping point for social, economic, and development transformation within small islands. We count on the partners from Europe and from the international development community. We appreciate the collaboration of the government of New Zealand in truly helping us to make this conference a success. We count on the international partnership from Germany and others to be with us. One of the major outcomes of this conference will be a center of excellence that will house a global data hub for SIDS, a global technology and innovation center, and a moment that will bring together private sector, and private sector businesses with government every 2 years that will analyze and plan within the 10-year strategy for the action steps of small island developing states. I thank you for your interest in Antigua and Barbuda. Look forward for your continued support. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. We highly appreciate your contribution with the keynote to our event today, particularly taking in mind your very, very busy schedule this week ahead of the SITS4 conference. I now would like to welcome Florian Laudi. Florian Laudi is the Director for the United Nations and Counterterrorism at the Federal Foreign Office of Germany, and he will be the Deputy Head of the German delegation to the SITS4 conference in Antigua and Barbuda next week. Florian Laudi, we are glad that you have agreed to contribute with a keynote on German SITS cooperation, but then later on also join our panel discussion. So welcome, and the floor is yours.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity today to address you in this environment. It is with great pleasure to be here at the representation of the Federal State of Bremen to Berlin and to have the opportunity to address a couple of words about the cooperation between the SITS and Germany to you. Let me start by thanking the Federal State of Bremen for its hospitality. I recently had the pleasure to visit one part of Bremen, which actually is a two-part federal state, Bremen and Bremerhaven. I had the pleasure to go to Bremerhaven and visit the Climate House, a fascinating museum which I would really recommend each and everyone in this room to visit if there's an opportunity. It's really worth a while. I would also like to thank the United Nations Association of Germany for organizing this event and the representatives of the Maldives and New Zealand for supporting this event today, and the Excellency from Antigua and Barbuda for giving us a glimpse on what we can expect next week in the Caribbean. Like many others, Germany is really looking forward to the conference taking place next week in Antigua and Barbuda. And I'm personally curious to experience the beauty of the islands after Ambassador Webson's short presentation at Cabo Verde last year at one of the pre-meetings. And the video clip he showed to us, it really whet the appetite to go to his country. The subject of the matter. We consider the SITS, the small island development states, and ourselves to be close partners at many different levels. I would like to stress three areas where we cooperate. First of all, we sense that we defend the existing international order, multilateralism, together. In particular, at the United Nations, in New York, in Geneva, and elsewhere. When we, Germans, joined the United Nations a bit more than 50 years ago, East and West by the time, one of the SITS joined the United Nations at the same day, 18th of September 1973, a year after I was born. It was the Bahamas, actually, which we had the privilege to join the United Nations with. So together we try and defend the international order. The second point, which is a highlight in our mutual endeavors, is the climate protection agenda, more precisely the areas of climate financing and adaptation, but also cultural preservation, science and research, and people-to-people exchange. And the last but not the least important issue that we try to be supportive is on development issues, issues that have just been reflected in the presentation from Antigua and Barbuda. Here, of course, our colleagues from the Ministry of Development Cooperation have the lead. For almost a decade now, our partnership with the SIDS has worked in support of the Sustainable Development Goals. We have achieved substantial progress with regard to many important fields such as oceans and seas, climate change, sustainable economic growth, sustainable and renewable energy, and disaster and risk reduction. And yet, SIDS are among the countries hit hardest by climate change. No doubt that they are the least responsible for climate change. Nevertheless, some of our SIDS partners will soon even be threatened in their very existence due to rising sea levels, for example. Let's not forget that. It is against this backdrop that Germany acknowledges its particular responsibility as an industrialized country. We are concerned at global warming as you are. We are concerned at global warming's devastating effects and threats to all of us, in particular the small island and development states. And we remain committed to the cooperation with the SIDS, in particular in the area of climate change, and here in all three dimensions of sustainability: the economic sphere, the social sphere, the ecological sphere. We will have a particular focus on supporting SIDS in the implementation of their ambitious climate targets to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and to the adaptation to climate change. Biodiversity, we just heard it, biodiversity needs to be conserved, and on this basis, sustainable and inclusive economic development can and will be achieved. We are proud to have been recognized at the SIDS Partnership Awards on a number of different occasions. This year, one of our regional projects in the Caribbean has been awarded third place in the environmental category. It's about a project that enhances national monitoring, reporting, and verification systems to enhance national data systems and to prepare Caribbean countries, in this case, for the Paris Agreement reporting. But our dedication and our cooperation goes beyond that. For example, last year we opened a new embassy in Suva, Fiji, which was actually, or which we tried to be inaugurated by Foreign Minister Baerbock, but due to, let's say, travel constraints, she couldn't make it last year, so she decided to travel this year, not only to Fiji, also to other countries represented here, but also to Fiji to mark this historic moment, which we think is a key area, not only for issues of development and climate change, but also for geopolitical challenges we are all exposed to all together. Germany also appointed let's say, special envoys, special ambassadors, both in the Pacific Island region and also in the Caribbean, with a strong focus on climate and regional issues. And we also want to be present and go through the European Union when interacting with the SIDS and support, therefore, the EU-appointed special envoy for SIDS. As UN Director, I would like to give a bit more emphasis, to shed a bit more light on the United Nations itself, the United Nations proper, if I may say so. We have demonstrated a long-term relationship with SIDS. We have regular meetings at the yearly general debate at UNGA. Last year, Chancellor Scholz and Foreign Minister Baerbock had a meeting, substantial meeting with representatives of the SIDS countries, where we compared notes, where we listened to your grievances and where we try to explain our views. And we came up with the decision and the conviction that it is relevant to join our forces and to fight for our things together. We maintain that interest in long-term relationship with the CITES. Shortly after last UNGA's meeting at high level, the Coalition on Addressing Sea Level Rise and Existential Threats, the CSAT element that the Ambassador of New Zealand just mentioned, was announced. Germany is indeed happy to have joined this initiative as one of the co-chairs upon invitation by the country of Tuvalu. And once we talk about New York, we would like to stress the link between climate and security, which has been a key priority for us for many years now. While we were last and the one before in the Security Council in 2011, 2012, and then later 2019, 2020, we fought for the first ever written document of the Council on this pertinent issue, security, climate and security, and we achieved a presidential statement. Later we tried and we lobbied hard actually to achieve a resolution on climate and security, and I must admit that we failed because we were exposed to the threat of 3 vetoes by the time. So we handed the text over to colleagues who fought the fair cause later on, but again they were unfortunately vetoed down. We will keep a strong view on this issue and we will maintain and fight for a resolution when time is ripe and when circumstances in the Council permit. Germany also plays a key role, and we try to play a key role with our partner from Namibia as one of 2 co-facilitators at the Summit of the Future, which is probably the most visible event taking place in the context of the United Nations this September in New York. Our overarching objectives here remain a strong reaffirmation to the UN Charter and the international order, and a reconfirmation of the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. We are now entering the final period of that negotiation process. A new draft text has just been presented. We prepared something that is ambitious, that is forward-looking, and that is action-oriented, and which may eventually lead us to a pact for the future later in September. While we do this, we try to involve civil society, academia, and others, which is why our Perm Rep, together with her Namibian counterpart, just traveled to Nairobi to capture views from the broader audience over there. And if you take into account the narrow structure of the document, you can easily recognize that development, that climate financing, that climate per se, do play a major role in that document. And we count on everyone's support that we can live up to our own expectations and come up with an ambitious, action-oriented document. But we have to join forces here. I'm a lawyer by profession. I used to be a lawyer before entering the Foreign Service. Therefore, I would like to direct your attention to legal questions for a moment too. Legal questions arising from the destructive force of the climate crisis. What happens when, despite all our efforts, an entire country disappears into the water? Serious questions. We lobbied hard to support Vanuatu's initiative for an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice. And the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea here in Germany, in Hamburg, which is close to Bremen, released its advisory opinion today, if I'm not mistaken. We supported the small island states here, and I understand that the court in Hamburg highlighted the seriousness of the climate crisis and placed strong emphasis on scientific evidence and precautionary approaches, and rightly so. In light of the upcoming SITS4 conference in Antigua and Barbuda, Germany pledged to support the conference itself, as well as the new SITS Center of Excellence in Antigua that Ambassador Webson just mentioned. And specifically here, we want to strengthen we will strengthen the data pillar, because we are convinced that the data collection, the proper analysis of data is extremely relevant and helpful to implement the SDGs properly. For accurate data, it's a necessary basis to understand where the SDG implementation stands and to be able to adjust policies accordingly. With all this in mind, I'm personally looking forward to next week's SITS4 conference and to deepening our strong partnership with the SITS. It will be my privilege to join our State Secretary and Special Envoy for International Climate Action, Jennifer Morgan, and travel to St. John's. I'm really curious to see the place where I've never been, I must admit. It is impressive already now to note how the host country did everything to prepare for such a major event with, as we just heard, more than 4,000 participants. It is also good news that the new Antigua and Barbuda agenda for SITS will be an outstanding guideline for the tasks of the next decade. We welcome that the link between climate and security is mentioned prominently in this outcome document. And where we can, we want to support, add flesh to the bone of that concept. At the conference, we will contribute through our State Secretary, who will co-chair the interactive dialogue on making climate finance work for SITS, building on the outcomes of the COP28. Also, she will host other occasions and events, and we believe as good partners for the SITS, we will contribute to a meaningful and rich program. We are convinced that the conference will be an excellent occasion to underline our support and increase our ties with relevant stakeholders from the small island and development states. And as I said, I'm really looking forward to join almost 4,000 participants in St. John's next week. I would leave it here and suggest that we deepen the discussion in the context of an interview with former Minister Hendricks and then in the panel discussion here in this room. I thank you very much again for the invitation and for organizing this.
Thank you very much indeed for your keynote, Florian Laudi. And as you already mentioned, we can deepen some of the issues you raised during the panel discussion. Before I invite you and your panelists to join me for the panel discussion, I now have the honor to once again invite Barbara Hendricks to join me here on stage. As mentioned before, she was Minister for the Environment of Germany. She was in office from 2013 to 2018. So amongst others, she was overseeing the negotiation of the Paris Agreement. And for this talk, we once again switch into German language. Ja, Frau Hendricks, vielen Dank nochmal, dass Sie sich die Zeit nehmen, heute hier mit uns ein bisschen über Ihre Erfahrungen aus Ihrer Zeit als Bundesumweltministerin vor allem mit Inselstaaten zu sprechen. Ich hatte gerade schon die UN-Klima- oder das Pariser Klimaabkommen angesprochen. Vor allem im Kontext der Klimaverhandlungen sind Ihnen die Inselstaaten ja sicherlich begegnet und aufgefallen. Was waren Ihre Wahrnehmungen von Inselentwicklungsstaaten und ja, wie haben Sie sich in die Verhandlungen, die Sie erlebt haben, eingebracht, trotz Ihrer begrenzten Ressourcen?
Ja, das ist vielleicht nicht allen Menschen bekannt, dass das 1,5 Grad Ziel nicht im Pariser Klimaschutzabkommen stehen würde, wenn nicht vor Ort in Paris die kleinen Inselstaaten dafür gesorgt hätten. alle Vorbereitungen, und die gehen ja immer über viele Monate, und dann gibt es Papiere, die sind im Entwurf vorhanden, und dann stehen in den Papieren eckige Klammern, das heißt, das ist noch nicht geeint und das muss weggearbeitet werden auf der COP. Aber alles, was nicht in eckigen Klammern steht, das ist schon geeint in der Vorbereitung. Und da wird auch normalerweise nie mehr was geändert. Und da stand als Ziel, dass also wir dafür sorgen müssen, dass bis zur Mitte der zweiten Hälfte dieses Jahrhunderts, also etwa 2075, wir dafür sorgen müssen, dass die Temperatur im Verhältnis zu vorindustrieller Zeit nicht um mehr als well below 2 Degree steigt. Das stand da drin, well below 2 Degree. Es war aber nicht definiert, was heißt well below 2 Degree. Ist es 1,9 oder ist es auf jeden Fall unter 2? Ja, auf jeden Fall unter 2, das war klar. Aber was es denn wirklich werden würde, das war natürlich nicht klar. Und es ist in der Tat so, dass die kleinen Inselstaaten ganz gegen alles, was normalerweise auf solchen UNO-Konferenzen geschieht, es geschafft haben, das 1,5 Grad Ziel, was für uns heute vollkommen selbstverständlich ist, dass wir das erreichen wollen, also dieses 1,5 Grad Ziel einzubringen in die Verhandlungen. Ich muss einräumen, es ist nicht zu 100% gelungen, denn das well below 2 Degree, das ist völkerrechtlich bindend, und das 1,5 Grad Ziel heißt, wir müssen alles tun, um es möglichst zu erreichen. Es ist aber nicht völkerrechtlich bindend. Also das ist nicht mehr gelungen auf der Pariser Konferenz, das 1,5 Grad Ziel völkerrechtlich bindend zu machen. Aber es war auch klar, ich hatte dort eigentlich immer als Verhandlungspartner, als Gesprächspartner hatte ich Tony de Bruym, den damaligen Außenminister der Marshall Islands. Mit dem habe ich einen engen Austausch gepflegt und der hat es praktisch für die kleinen Inselstaaten, insbesondere die pazifischen, gegenüber Deutschland und Europa vertreten. Und er hat auch gesagt, ja, wenn es denn wenigstens im Text steht, es muss erwähnt werden, 1,5 Grad. Well below 2 Degree reicht für uns nicht aus. Für uns, besonders vulnerablen kleinen Inselstaaten, reicht das nicht aus. Und das ist gegen alles, was sonst auf UNO-Konferenzen geschieht, tatsächlich gelungen. Also Tony de Bruym kam zu mir und ich habe das dann erstmal auf der europäischen Ebene weiter verfolgt, zusammen mit der damaligen luxemburgischen Umweltministerin. Luxemburg hatte damals die EU-Präsidentschaft, deswegen hat die sozusagen die Verhandlungen geführt und mit dem damals zuständigen Kommissar der EU-Kommission auch. Und wir haben uns dann verständigt, ja, wir Europa, wir wollen das. Und als wir Europa gesagt haben, wir wollen das, dann kam auch John Kerry, der damalige Außenminister der Vereinigten Staaten von Amerika, der jetzt der Klimabotschafter ist von Präsident Biden, und der war Verhandlungsführer für die Vereinigten Staaten, und der sagte, gut, wenn Europa sagt, wir machen das, dann machen wir USA das auch. Und so ist es gelungen. Also das war eigentlich überhaupt nicht zu erwarten, und ehrlich gesagt bin ich auch ein bisschen stolz drauf. Wir hätten sonst dieses 1,5 Grad Ziel gar nicht. Wir hätten es sonst nicht.
Ja, Sie haben Tony de Bruym schon angesprochen, den damaligen Außenminister der Marshallinseln, der sich im Kontext der Pariser Klimaverhandlungen als einer von vielen Inselstaatenvertreter besonders hervorgetan hat. Sie haben in einem Interview mal gesagt, dass die Begegnung mit ihm auch für Sie persönlich so ein bisschen so was wie ein persönliches Aha-Erlebnis gewesen ist. Was hat Sie so an ihm beeindruckt und wie wichtig sind solche Einzelpersonen, gerade vielleicht auch aus besonders vom Klimawandel betroffenen Inselstaaten, für uns alle als Vorbilder im Kampf gegen den Klimawandel?
Tony de Bruym war nur einige Jahre älter als ich, ein paar Jahre, aber nicht viele Jahre, vielleicht 5 oder 6 Jahre älter als ich. Er ist aber leider schon 2017 gestorben. Und ich habe ihn kennengelernt im Jahr 2014. Da hat er den Alternativen Nobelpreis bekommen und der wurde ihm in Zürich verliehen und ich war gebeten worden, die Laudatio auf ihn zu halten. Ich kannte ihn vorher gar nicht. Aber ich war halt Umweltministerin in Deutschland und man hat mich gefragt, halten Sie die Laudatio auf Tonio de Brum? Da habe ich mich natürlich sachkundig gemacht, mich mit seinem Leben und Wirken auseinandergesetzt. Vorher kannte ich ihn nicht. Dann bin ich ihm dort zum ersten Mal begegnet und dann bis zum Pariser Abkommen auch noch mindestens ein weiteres Mal, vielleicht sogar zweimal, das weiß ich nicht mehr genau, aber wir hatten ihn eingeladen zu unserem Petersberger Klimadialog. Das machen wir in Deutschland immer einmal im Jahr, meistens im Mai, zur Vorbereitung der COP, die dann am Ende des Jahres stattfindet. Und das war dann eben auch 2015 im Mai, hatten wir ihn eingeladen zum Petersberger Klimadialog. Und am Vorabend, das war ein Sonntag, der Petersberger Klimadialog geht immer montags bis mittwochs und man trifft sich aber schon am Vorabend so informell, sonntagsabends, waren wir im Gästehaus des Auswärtigen Amtes für die Berlinerinnen und Berliner unter ihnen. Das ist die Borsig-Villa am Tegeler See, also ganz schön gelegen auch. Und da hatten wir, weil es auch schönes Wetter war, einfach auch einen schönen Abend. Und wir hatten eine kleine Jazz-Kombo. Und ich habe den Toni Bröm wirklich zum Tanzen aufgefordert, weil irgendwer muss ja anfangen mit Tanzen. Und das hat natürlich auch Vertrauen irgendwie geweckt. Und wir haben uns einfach immer gut verstanden. Und er hat mir dann eben auch vertraut. Sonst wäre das auch nicht gelungen mit den 1,5 Grad. Man musste das ja in Europa auch erstmal durchsetzen und dann USA und alle anderen gewinnen, was dann gelungen ist. Und Tonio de Brum, für mich war es aber wirklich, als ich mich mit seiner Vita auseinandergesetzt hatte, der hat als Kind oder als Jugendlicher noch die Atomversuche auf dem Bikini-Atoll erlebt. Und das Bikini-Atoll gehört zu den Marshall Islands. Es ist natürlich unbewohnbar. Viele von uns haben gewusst, was auf dem Bikini-Atoll war, damals Ende der 40er Jahre, Anfang der 50er. Aber ich wusste auch damals nicht, dass es zu den Marshall Islands gehört. Das habe ich dann gelernt, als ich mich mit Tonio de Brum auseinandergesetzt habe. Und das hat natürlich sein Leben geprägt. Er war also eigentlich, hat Jura studiert und hat sein ganzes Leben lang dem Kampf um den Erhalt seines Staates und natürlich um die Menschenrechte für die Bürgerinnen und Bürger seines Landes gekämpft. Insbesondere im Zusammenhang mit der UNO. Die Marshall Islands hatten auch zu der Zeit, ich glaube, das ist auch heute noch so, nur eine einzige Botschaft in der Welt und das ist die bei den Vereinten Nationen. Es gibt ja viele kleine Inselstaaten, die haben nur so 50.000 Einwohner, 100.000 Einwohner. Die haben natürlich weder die Finanzmittel noch die Verwaltungskraft, um zum Beispiel überall Botschaften zu unterhalten. Also es ist was ganz Besonderes, dass wir heute die Botschafterin der Malediven haben. Die können auch nicht überall sein. Ist also sehr schön, dass sie hier sind und wir freuen uns darüber, aber es gibt viele kleine Inselstaaten, die können das nicht, weder aus finanziellen Gründen noch, dass sie es überhaupt auch verwaltungsmäßig könnten. Und dann ist natürlich die UNO der wichtigste Ansprechpartner für diese kleinen Staaten.
Sie haben es gerade schon angesprochen, trotz der begrenzten Kapazitäten, oder vielleicht auch gerade aufgrund der begrenzten Kapazitäten sind internationale Organisationen, sind die Vereinten Nationen gerade für kleine Staaten, gerade für kleine Inselstaaten von besonderer Bedeutung. Sie werden häufig auch als Vorkämpfer des Multilateralismus bezeichnet. Da spielt das rein, was wir vorhin schon von Botschafter Webson gehört haben, vielleicht, dass sie auch so ein bisschen so etwas wie ein moralisches Gewissen der internationalen Politik sind, zumindest werden sie oft so bezeichnet. Sie vertrauen aber auch in besonderer Weise auf eine Organisation wie die Vereinten Nationen als Garant für die eigene Sicherheit, würde ich mal sagen, weil sie eben wenig wirtschaftliche Druckmittel haben, häufig keine militärischen Druckmittel haben, anders als größere Staaten. Wie sehen Sie heute als jemand, der sich über viele Jahrzehnte hinweg nicht nur mit Umweltpolitik, sondern auch mit Außenpolitik, mit internationaler Politik beschäftigt hat. Wie sehen Sie heute auf die internationale Zusammenarbeit, auf den Multilateralismus und was kann ein Land wie Deutschland, aber können eben auch gerade vielleicht kleinere Staaten, kleine Inselentwicklungsstaaten tun, um den Multilateralismus, die internationale Zusammenarbeit wieder zu stärken?
Also ich glaube schon, dass wir natürlich auf den Multilateralismus angewiesen sind, also auch zugunsten unserer eigenen Sicherheit. also wir auch in Mitteleuropa, unser Land Deutschland und auch die europäischen Länder allgemein, wir sind auf den Multilateralismus angewiesen und müssen dafür auch alle möglichen Anstrengungen unternehmen, um tatsächlich mit so vielen Ländern wie eben möglich auf Augenhöhe in Kontakt zu sein und Vertrauen zu haben und gegenseitiges Vertrauen nicht nur aufzubauen, sondern auch zu halten und auf Dauer dafür einzustehen. Das sind natürlich besondere Anforderungen an uns, an größere Länder wie die Bundesrepublik Deutschland mit der entsprechenden Finanzkraft und Verwaltungskraft. Natürlich haben wir da besondere Verantwortungen, aber es ist ganz wichtig, natürlich auch dann die Institutionen zu stärken, also den Beitrag für die UNO zum Beispiel auch zu leisten, damit die UNO wiederum ihrerseits in der Lage ist, ihre Aufgaben zu erfüllen, zugunsten zum Beispiel der kleinen Länder, die das nicht ganz alleine sozusagen in der Welt hinbekommen könnten. Das ist einfach so und deswegen glaube ich, müssen wir auch die internationalen Institutionen auch weiterhin stärken, was wir auch tun mit deutlichen Finanzbeiträgen, die wir zum Beispiel in den UNO-Gremien auch aus unseren Bundesmitteln geben. Es geht ja auch nicht anders. Es muss auch nach den Möglichkeiten der Länder muss es gemacht werden. Da gibt es natürlich ein paar Länder, die können ein bisschen mehr tun, wie sagen wir mal wohlhabende arabische Länder oder so. Also da kommt es jetzt darauf an, dass man die auch mal ein bisschen verpflichtet, ein bisschen mehr zu tun. Aber egal, wir können uns keinen schlanken Fuß machen, wenn anderes nicht tun, können wir nicht auch aufhören, das geht nicht. Und deswegen glaube ich, dass also tatsächlich zu Recht zum Beispiel die SIDS, die Small Island Developing States, auf die UNO vertrauen müssen und auch können und natürlich auch Unterstützer brauchen. Neben der UNO. Und übrigens, ich will noch was sagen, also auch deutsche Außenpolitik ist niemals völlig uneigennützig. Also wir streben ja jetzt demnächst mal wieder einen nicht ständigen Sitz in der UNO an, im Sicherheitsrat. Also einen ständigen Sitz wollen wir eigentlich auch schon 30 Jahre lang haben, werden wir aber wahrscheinlich nicht bekommen. Aber einen nicht ständigen Sitz, den streben wir jetzt wieder an. Ja, und die Small Island Development States, die bringen mehr als 30 Stimmen auf die Waagschale. Ja, das wird ja dann abgestimmt, wer soll es dann sein. Und wenn man denn dann Vertrauen gewonnen hat, zu Recht gewonnen hat, dann bekommt man auch wieder was zurück bei dem, was man so vorhat. Also es ist nicht alles immer nur uneigennützig.
Vielen Dank, Frau Hendricks. Eine letzte Frage noch mit Bitte um eine kurze Antwort. Blicken wir nochmal auf das Jahr 2017 zurück, 2 Jahre nach Verabschiedung des Pariser Klimaabkommens. Damals hat hier in Deutschland, in Bonn, allerdings unter der Präsidentschaft des pazifischen Inselstaats Fidschi eine UN-Klimakonferenz stattgefunden. Die erste und bis heute tatsächlich auch die einzige UN-Klimakonferenz unter Präsidentschaft eines Inselstaats. Wäre es nicht an der höchsten Zeit, dass die Inselstaaten als besonders vom Klimawandel betroffene Staaten die Leitung einer Klimakonferenz, die Leitung der Klimaverhandlungen häufiger übernehmen, als das in der Vergangenheit der Fall gewesen ist?
Ja, ich würde das sehr begrüßen und das passt vielleicht dem Finanzminister nicht, aber dann ist Deutschland wieder dran, weil bei uns ist das UNO-Klimasekretariat in Bonn angesiedelt. Und deswegen hat die Konferenz im Jahre 2017 auch in Bonn stattgefunden unter dem Vorsitz von Fidschi. Und wenn irgendein anderer kleiner Inselstaat, der auch die Verwaltungskraft und die Finanzkraft gar nicht haben kann, und übrigens, wie sollen die auch alle dahin fliegen und da untergebracht sein? Das kann irgendwie gar nicht gelingen. Also wenn einer der kleinen Inselstaaten sich wieder bewirbt, dann wird Deutschland wieder Ausrichter sein. Das ist unsere Verpflichtung, weil das Klimasekretariat, das UNO-Klimasekretariat mit mehreren 100 Beschäftigten in Bonn angesiedelt ist. Das wichtigste Sekretariat, UNO-Sekretariat, das wir in Bonn haben. Wir haben auch kleinere mit viel weniger Menschen, aber das ist bei weitem das Wichtigste. Ja, und so haben wir das dann 2017 gemacht, auch finanziert. Und so würden wir das auch wieder tun. Das ist unsere Aufgabe.
Vielen Dank, Frau Hendricks, dass Sie sich die Zeit genommen haben, ja, uns ein bisschen an Ihren Erfahrungen teilhaben zu lassen und an Ihrer Sicht auf die Bedeutung von Inselstaaten, gerade auch aus einer deutschen Perspektive. Vielen herzlichen Dank. I now would like to welcome our speakers for the panel discussion to join me here on stage and of course online via Zoom. Next to Florian Laudi, whom you already met during his keynote, I would like to also welcome Marie Stefania Perrine. She's from Mauritius, or to be more concrete, from the island of Rodriguez, where she's the founding curator of the Global Shapers Rodriguez Hub, also the founder of the SIDS Youth Aims Hub, and she's also a recipient of a UNFCCC Capacity Fellowship, which is the reason why she's currently based in Bonn, where she's working with the United Nations Climate Change Secretariat. Thank you, Stefania, for coming to Berlin and joining us here for the panel discussion. Furthermore, I am glad to welcome Professor Stefano Moncada, who is joining us online. He is the director for the Islands and Small States Institute at the University of Malta. And I hope, Stefano, you can hear us and that we will be able to see you also on the screen in a moment. Florian Laudi, Stefania, please already join me on stage.
Ja.
I'm sorry for that. All right, so we also can see you, Stefano. I hope you can hear us well.
Yes, loud and
All right.
clear. I hope we can hear you too.
Perfect. Thank you for joining us online for this event. Stefania, my first question would be to you. I've already mentioned in my brief introduction that you're from the island of Rodriguez in Mauritius. Can you tell us a little bit more about your home country, or your home island, which probably not many of us is familiar, and also a little bit more about your engagement for SIDS and for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals back in Rodriguez?
Thank you, Oliver. Thank you. So good evening, everybody. So like Oliver mentioned, I'm from a very small island called Rodriguez, which is a semi-autonomous island forming part of the Republic of Mauritius. So Mauritius has a population of 1.3 million, and Rodriguez has a population of 44,427 inhabitants as of year 2021. So Rodriguez is semi-autonomous, which means that it has gained regional autonomy. In 2002, it has a local government, the Rodriguez Regional Assembly, which is a democratically elected every 5 years. And apart from that also, we participate in the national election. For example, this year we're going to have a national election in Mauritius, and Rodriguez will be participating in that. So Rodriguez is one of the youngest of the Mascarene Island, along with Mauritius and also Réunion Island. So Rodriguez is 18 kilometers long and 8 kilometers broad. It is the most isolated of the 3 Mascarene Islands, but it has the largest fringing coral reef and a very large lagoon, one of the largest lagoons of the Indian Ocean. So our economy is different from that of mainland Mauritius. In Rodriguez, our economy is mostly based on fishing and agriculture. And now more and more we have a blooming tourism industry. So the island's remoteness from Mauritius, including its distinct history. So we have a very different history as compared to Mauritius. So in Mauritius, you're going to have a more multicultural culture with indentured laborers coming from India, some coming from China, some coming from Europe, and so they came to Mauritius and they were working in sugarcane fields mostly. But in Rodrigues, we mostly had like slaves coming from Africa, from Madagascar, and also we have descendants from Europe also. So being isolated and far away from national growth centers has contributed largely to making that Rodrigue has a unique sociocultural identity. And yeah, so we are different. And also because of that difference, sometimes it is difficult for us to have a voice in the development of our island.
Thank you, Stefania. We will come back to some of the points you mentioned. I now would like to pose a question to you, Stefano. We already heard quite a bit about the different challenges that are faced by small island developing states today, but maybe can you summarize for us once again why it is so important from your point of view to give special consideration to small states and to give special consideration to island states, and of all the challenges small island developing states face, what are the most significant ones and maybe also the ones that distinguish small island developing states from other small states?
Yes, thank you, Oliver. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me, and I'd like to extend my greetings to all the distinguished guests and the audience who's following online. So I'm the director of the Islands and Small State Institute. We're based at the University of Malta. We've been around for more than 30 years, specializing in a multidisciplinary manner on issues related to islands and small states. So you asked me why islands are important, why should we talk about them? Well, islands, many small islands are unique. They have developed biogeographical features that make them unique, and even cultural and societal characteristics also generally regarded as to be unique. This is especially for social capital, for example, the social bond among people. Islands are also, we find that they're also different from each other. We can find low-lying islands, volcanic islands, mountainous islands. Islands at different degrees of distance from the equator. Some high income, some low income, some middle income, some in transition. Now, notwithstanding these diversities, many islands share similar characteristics, irrespective of where they are distant from the equator or what is their geographical composition. So many of these islands face similar vulnerabilities, and this is mostly due to their size, small size, and remoteness, which limit, for example, economies of scales. They operate in small markets where it is difficult to operate, right? To have, sometimes, difficulties to increase also certain specific standards of living. The cost of practically everything, from transportation to production, passing through even the impact of disasters, and I would say the running of a country is usually more costly. Now, the interesting part, and that's why for people like myself, this topic comes very exciting. Notwithstanding these vulnerabilities, many islands have managed to build strong, resilient societies and economies. So we ask ourselves, how is this possible? How, that notwithstanding all these inherent vulnerabilities, all these constraints, we believe this is due to a mix of resourcefulness of islanders and the communities and societies, but also due to an appropriate set of policy measures. So authorities, together with the communities, have, in the course of the years, adapted to support resilience building. So in the face of these constraints, they have either come together or they adopted solutions to address those vulnerabilities. So we find, one would say paradoxically, that many islands are very highly vulnerable, but also highly resilient, because they've done something about it. Of course, this is in general, then we have the exceptions. I would like to close with one point as we start this first round of views, that this resilience building is important, but it comes at a cost. And the cost sustained by small states and small islands is disproportionately higher than larger states, because of course the population is smaller, so you have to divide the cost by the population. So the cost of maintaining a prime minister in Malta is much higher than any larger country. And like the impact of disasters is much higher per capita. However, this is not accounted sufficiently in the way certain fundings are distributed, or certain concessional funding when we come to developing states are being allocated. So I think this is also one of the elements that we'll be discussing at the SITS conference, and I'm looking forward also to share some of these insights with you soon.
Stefano, Florian Laudi, we've heard that small island developing states at SITS are very diverse. They're diverse in terms of geographical location, diverse in terms of size, remoteness, dispersion of the islands. How can we make sure when we gather at the SITS 4 conference in Antigua and Barbuda, how can we make sure if we put all island developing states into one category to make sure this diversity is not overlooked? And how can we go beyond one size fits all solutions?
Well, thank you for raising this issue. Probably the SITS themselves would be better placed to provide accurate answers, but I remember from a series of, let's say, pre-conferences, pre-meetings leading up to the conference next week in Antigua and Barbuda, and most visibly the one in Praia, Cabo Verde last summer, that the SITS themselves had first split, let's say, into geographic groups, what I would call roughly the Pacific area, the Caribbean area, and Africa, plus other members of the SITS, and had their individually tailored meetings before they, for the first time, in the run-up to the Antigua conference, met in Praia, Cabo Verde. And I remember, I was there only as a guest, of course, as an observer. I remember that the almost 40 represented delegations had intense discussions among themselves about commonalities, but also, I assume, I was not always allowed in the room, about, let's say, divergent views and differentiated approaches to the subject matter. I remember, for example, it's just one example, that two representatives from South America, if I remember correctly, it was Guyana and Suriname, they put a particular emphasis in addition to the oceans, the seas, sea level rise, and so on, also to forests, which is quite understandable if you know the topography of these two countries. But this doesn't have to be a contradiction to the interests and to the objectives of the other members of the group. To the contrary, I think it's worth a while to join forces here and to grow with the diversity in the group. That would be my response. And it was quite an intense discussion, I understand, quite intensive discussions the SITS representatives had among themselves over almost 2 days, but they came up with a joint approach leading up now to the agenda for Antigua and Barbuda. So I think the diversity is rather maybe an asset rather than something like an impediment to success.
Thank you, Florian Laudi. Stefania, you mentioned that your own island has a semi-autonomous status within Mauritius. If we also keep in mind what we just heard about the diversity of small island developing states, also the diversity of islands within small island developing states, how important is it for SIDS governments, for funding donors and other stakeholders to particularly also look on the island or even the local community level when in decision making, in policy making, in implementing projects, for example, in adaptation to climate change? How important is it to not just focus on the national level, but to go down to the island or local level?
So, as mentioned, SIDS are divided into 3 categories. So we have a Pacific SIDS, Caribbean SIDS, and the Ames region SIDS, which encompasses islands of Atlantic, Indian Ocean, not so much of a Mediterranean now, but also of the South China Sea. So why categorizing SIDS as a specific region? And because each SIDS within those regions, they have specific challenges and opportunities also. And also the fact that they have a different socioeconomic predispositions also. This is why when looking at adaptation measures, so it is very important to use detailed economic and social indicators to categorize SIDS based on their specific characteristic, such as their GDP, because in SIDS we have developing SIDS, we have LDC also in SIDS, and although, for example, Singapore is categorized as a SIDS, Singapore has quite a blooming economy also. Now, going back to your question about including local communities in adaptation processes, especially concerning government and funding donors. So it is quite important to include the local community in such decision processes because it is the local community who knows what they are facing. So for example, back home in Rodrigues, so we have implemented policies such as banning plastic bags, closing octopus closure for management of resources, and also banning of single-use cutlery. So while these are very prominent decisions taken by the local government, so it was not easy for the local population to accept those decisions. Why? One of the main disadvantage, or I can say that the government didn't quite really take into account, was local perception of the community. So if I take this decision for the local community, is the local community going to go with it? So I think that before implementing adaptation measures or taking decisions for the local community, it is very important to have consultations with the local community because, like I say, they are on the ground, they know better than anyone what they are facing. And also, there is this thinking that it was international donors, sometimes they come with their knowledge and they implement projects and etc. But without taking into account the local context. So one of the reasons why most projects fail is because you are not taking the needs of a community, what the community is facing. So these are not taken into account. So international donors, sometimes they come, they implement the project, they do workshops and they write their reports, but after that, when they go back home, what happens to the local community? So the local community does not really take into account those projects because this is that. Why should we take what somebody from a foreign country is coming to tell us to do? Whereas we know exactly what we are facing. This is especially the case when working on projects related, for example, to fishermen communities. Fishermen communities, for example, if I can take the case of fishermen communities in Rodrigues. So I did a research with fishermen communities benefiting from regional funding to implement sustainable fisheries management in the island. And one common issue that the fishermen said was like, so we have a funding, but after that, when the funders, they go back to their countries, so the project dies. So there is no follow-up, and there is no monitoring and no evaluation to see if the project had really worked and what could have been done better to improve a project. So taking into account the local community, especially when designing and implementing the projects, taking into account their needs, their views, it is very important.
Thank you, Stefania. Stefano, you just mentioned some of the economic challenges SIDS face in your first statement. How can the United Nations, how can partners help SIDS to advance economic diversification and better integration into global markets, which is one of the aims of the SIDS 4 conference and also of the pre-negotiated outcome document?
Thank you for the question, Oliver. And so, of course, there are many traditional ways in which this conference, or in general, the support from the donor community can help, support, guide a bit better the Sustainable Development Goals of SIDS. I would definitely put on top of the agenda the recognition of, as I mentioned before, of the vulnerabilities and the cost of building resilience, irrespective of the income that SIDS experience or have at the exact moment. We have witnessed, like many other previous distinguished guests have mentioned already, that when least developed countries, or when there is any type of graduation from a lower band of income to a higher band of income that excludes SIDS from accessing concessional funding, we are basically punishing countries, and especially in this case SIDS, for improving, from increasing their governance, the standards of living, to being able to ameliorate their functioning of their institutions. And I think this is wrong, and it's one of the things that perhaps could be rediscussed or started to be rediscussed in this type of conferences. The income level does not signify necessarily the end of the vulnerability, the end of the challenges that many countries face. So we have seen this in many occasions where, SIDS have graduated from, LDCs or any other type of band, and the concessional funding stops, and there are many difficulties and challenges that the countries still face, and they're not recognized by any type of support or guidance. And I think this is wrong, because it's like, again, sending the message that I punish you because you've been doing well. I tend to support the initiative put forward by some countries too, whereby perhaps we could start thinking of funding resilience, funding what works, rather than only looking at the income levels and the vulnerability levels. I think a step in the right direction is the recent United Nations Multidimensional Vulnerability Index, which has been worked out by a distinguished panel. However, even there, I believe that we could dare a bit more to integrate issues that are very important for small states and for which they suffer disproportionately without being or wanting to, only by the virtue of being small or isolated or inheriting remoteness. So I think there are some parameters in which there are still many asymmetries that are not accounted for by the current funding mechanisms between donors and the international community. Thank you.
Stefano. Florian Laudi, you already mentioned during your keynote that the German Minister of Foreign Affairs, Annalena Baerbock, was visiting Fiji, a Pacific island nation, just 1 or 2 weeks ago, also an island nation where Germany opened a new embassy last year. The visit of Annalena Baerbock to Fiji was already her second visit to the Pacific Island region after she was in Palau, I think 2 years ago, which was the first ever visit of a German Minister of Foreign Affairs to a Pacific Island sits in all times. So what does this tell about the increased relevance of the Pacific Islands region, but also sits in general towards German foreign policy?
That's a good question, I think. Frankly, I'm not quite sure if it was the first ever visit there, but it might be actually, it's true. As I indicated, her intention, of course, was to be there for the inauguration of our embassy in Suva, which then, due to the technical reasons, I think, with the German armed forces airplanes, was unfortunately not possible, and she said right on the spot she wants to come back as soon as possible, and now that visit could be replanned and actually been done. But the point is, why do we try to maybe give more attention to that part of the world, let's say, and even if it's geographically speaking, in terms of distance, far away, we realized over the last years that this is one of the key regions, and this is not only for development issues or for climate issues. Yes, these are relevant issues too, but it's also to do with, let's say, geopolitical implications. And we found ourselves here in a new, let's say, security environment, and we are grateful for the support that we receive by many, be it at the United Nations, be it in let's say, more practical terms on the ground, and likewise, or the other way around, we've found it's a high time to give more relevance or visible relevance to, it's always been relevant, but more visible, tangible relevance to partners on the other side of the globe, so to speak. And like our colleagues in the Ministry of Defense, for example, sent for the second time now in a relatively short time span a German frigate to that part of the world. We also think that our travel diplomacy, so to speak, should reflect the relevance of that area. When we talk about, for example, about maintaining the rules-based system, if we talk about supporting our partners around the globe, when we talk about, let's say, conflicts should rather be ruled by international courts rather than by the power of the mighty, so to speak. And all this is a reflection of what I just said, and therefore it's only a logical implication almost that a German foreign minister travels to the Pacific Island region maybe more frequently, more visibly than it happened in the past.
Thank you. You mentioned the increased geopolitical relevance of regions like the Pacific, given the tensions between the United States of America on the one hand side and China on the other hand side, but maybe also of other reasons, including the Caribbean, for example, in face of Russian attempts to win support for its own policies. You also mentioned that there's a shared, shared vision between many small island states in Germany, that in the end there should be the rule of law and not the rule of the mighty. That was how you said it. Are there any measures, any policies at the Federal Foreign Office to make sure that, as far as that is possible, given the huge power gap, there is, or you try to approach island states on eye level. That's something you mentioned before, Barbara Hendricks, and to make sure that in the end they're not mere objects in a global power struggle, but what can Germany do to make sure that in the end it's really about the people and their development and not about that they're not becoming objects in a global power struggle.
Well, I hope we never gave the impression that we would take anyone as an object rather than a subject with value, and we tried to listen to each and everyone. I remember from my days in New York at the United Nations that of course we reached out to everyone. But travel diplomacy is maybe one element that will add to that and visibly add to that if ministers go to maybe parts of the world where we should have been earlier, but due to other tasks at hand that did not really materialize. I think Stephanie also made an important point about the ownership idea. It doesn't make much sense to go to country A, listen to people, and then do something else because your planners tell you to do something different. No, this needs to be incorporated into the whole machinery and projects and cooperation programs and so on will have to take that into account. Otherwise, it does not really make sense. And in that sense, I think it's really the right call to do. The world, from a geopolitical point of view, has developed, has not always developed in the right direction, and we need to maybe reach out stronger and with more intensity to partners that have been at least geographically speaking, far away for far too long, and I'm actually grateful that we pursue that path now with more rigidity maybe than we did in the past. I mean, you may look into the history books. It may also have to do with the fact that up to 1990 we were busy with ourselves in a certain way, and then we had to learn our lessons. But nowadays, we are really grateful for the support that we received. For example, it's just one example of the many Ukraine resolutions prepared in New York. And this was not about a European issue or something. It was really about the rules of the international order. And now it might be Ukraine under pressure. Next time it might be somewhere else. And it's a give and take game. And former Mr. Hendricks indicated that. Now we and Ukraine needs support. We receive it and we're happy to give it back. And I think what I call travel diplomacy in that area underlines that need and that sense of cooperation between the two sides.
Thank you, Florian Laudi. Stefania, when we talk about island developing states, is maybe the labeling of them as small island states, as small island developing states, part of a problem, because in a way it belittles or even stigmatize these countries and also the people living there? And would it be more appropriate from your point of view to label small island developing states as large ocean states, a term that has become quite popular over the last couple of years? And we just heard Ambassador Webson underlining that SIDS are custodians over nearly 1/3 of the global oceans. So as someone coming from a small island state, would you feel more happy with labeling your country as a large ocean state?
So in SIDS, we have a very close relationship with the ocean. So we need the ocean not only for livelihood, but also for recreational activities. We like to go to the beach on Sundays to just like chill out from work. And also the sea forms part of our culture. For example, back home, not only in Mauritius, but in Seychelles also, the sea forms part of the identity of islanders. So yes, there is more impetus and for calling small island states, referring to them as large ocean states. So this has been on the front line for quite a few years now. So the term large ocean states in itself, it in contrast to small island states, so it reflects that small islands, they have vast oceanic and areas that they can control, and this brings not only the control, but also economic and livelihood for us. And it is mostly self-identification and self-classification because it's still in the process of discussion. Are we going for it or are we sticking to like seeds? And also the emergence of large ocean discourse, it is especially notably because, as you said, the challenges associated with referring to small island states because of their smallness, of their size. And considerable parts of the world's ocean and living resources are under the jurisdiction of small island states. And for example, Mauritius, Seychelles, and the Maldives, they form part of the top 15 states with largest marine to land area ratios. And of course, they consider themselves as large ocean states. And also, by saying we are not small island state, but instead we are large ocean state, it indicates that there is also the rejection of self-identification of vulnerability, because sometimes also there is the term vulnerability, which is associated with small island states. And also in proclaiming themselves as large ocean states, countries often provide justification, like I said, related to their economic dependence on the ocean and expanded ocean sovereignty. And for example, in 2017, the Paluan president said, "My country, Palau, is a small island developing state located just 6 degrees north of the equator in the Pacific Ocean. While it is small inland, it at about 180 square miles, it is a large ocean state, or roughly the size of France under its jurisdiction." So self-identifying as a large ocean state, it represents a fundamental shift that asserts sovereignty over large areas of the ocean. For example, in the Indian Ocean, so Mauritius and Seychelles have a joint management area initiative, which is considered to be the largest in the world, where the maritime zone, it is jointly managed by both islands, and it represents huge opportunities, but also as well, there's a large amount of responsibilities associated with it. And also, it has to be able to manage this vast area. It established a management commission, so which looks at everything related to the management processes. So this has enabled both Mauritius and the Seychelles to regulate, for example, seabed activities, as well as conservation efforts, especially given that we have, there is the Saya de Mala, which is a large seabed area, as large as Switzerland, and it has a huge potential for resources for both islands. So indeed, there is legitimacy for small island nations to self-classify themselves as large island states, given that the central role that the ocean plays in our life.
Thank you, Stefania. You just mentioned the large or huge maritime economic zones of many small island developing states, to maybe give you some perspective. I think the Maldives, if you include the maritime economic zones, are 3 times the size of Germany, or Kiribati in the Pacific, which has a landmass about the size of Berlin, actually. If you include the maritime zones, they are 8 times the size of Germany in the end. So definitely the ocean is a very important element when we talk about SIDS. And I remember that in the Pacific Islands region, there's a very well-known article by an author called Epeliha Orfa, who already in 1994, so many, many years before the term large ocean states was getting popular, said that there's a world of difference between viewing small island states, between viewing the Pacific as small islands dispersed in a vast sea, and on the other hand side, or the other perspective would be to see them as a sea of island, which puts much more emphasis on the ocean as something that connects instead of something that divides these states. We are already running late of time, unfortunately, so I have one last question to you, Stefano, and afterwards, of course, we would like to take the time to give you in the audience a chance to also contribute with some of your questions. Stefano, my last question to you would be focusing on the upcoming SIDS4 conference once again. What are your expectations towards this conference, and from your perspective, how strong is the pre-negotiated outcome document, the Antigua and Barbuda agenda for small island developing states, and how optimistic are you that this agenda will be really implemented in the next 10 years? And we heard from Ambassador Webson that the next 10 years are crucial for small island developing states and their development.
Thank you for the question. And of course, again, congratulations to the brilliant point that the panelists and the previous speakers have mentioned. So just to be quick, because I know we are approaching the end of the discussion, I see 2 interesting points, one more positive, one a bit less. So the emphasis on the Center of Excellence on Data that was mentioned by the representative from Antigua, and the fact that it is enshrined in the document, I think is a very important aspect, especially not only for research, because we know that there are many problems in gathering information, specific indicators in the context of SIDS, where it is, again, more costly to collect data, to have the right expertise, to at times even adopt certain methodology that were born in large countries. So it is difficult to adopt them and adapt them in the context of small states. So a center of excellence that perhaps even with the help of AI and the recent technology developments can serve as an important ground to collect, assess, gather information specifically for SIDS is a very good movement. And I'm happy to hear that it was included in the document. Perhaps something which I would have expected to come up a bit more in the document is reference to the importance of traditional and indigenous knowledge and the cultural aspect and the important links with the ocean, which in my opinion do not come necessarily strong in this document. And there is a bit more emphasis on which are of course important and they're meant for many small states on trade and economic transaction. I mean, I'm an economist by background, so I know this is also part of of who I am intrinsically. However, the element of the human aspects and the livelihoods linked to the culture and traditional knowledge of many of the SIDS could have gained a bit more importance, especially because it can act at times as an engine for finding solution to climate change or including endogenous way of developing within the countries, which sometimes we forget because we tend to prefer parachuted solutions from outside. So these are the 2 points that I wanted to mention, and I'm of course happy to answer to any of the other questions. Thank you, Oliver.
Thank you, Stefano. As mentioned before, now we would like to invite you in the audience to also get engaged in the panel discussion with your questions. If you're here in Berlin, please just raise your hand, and a colleague of mine will come with a microphone to you to pose your question. Please keep in mind that this event is streamed online and your question will be recorded. And if you join us online, please use the question and answer function in your Zoom menu to send us your written question, and then another colleague of mine will introduce your questions here to the audience. Since we are already ahead of, or we are already behind our scheduled end time, unfortunately, I would propose that we maybe take another 10 minutes for questions from the audience. I hope that's fine for everyone. So are there any questions? There's one question over there.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Michael. This question is for Florian. You talked positively about the SDGs progress up to now, citing, for example, examples, progress in biodiversity and renewable energy. Last year, in September, we heard from the United Nations that the SDGs are in peril, and I would like you to reconcile these differences. The second point is you talked about the summit of the future in September, noting that it would be the most visible event for the UN this year, of course. And of course, Germany is in partnership, co-chairing the Summit of the Future with Namibia. And you mentioned that multilateralism is of focus in terms of the preparatory documents to this summit in September. Recalling the challenges that are faced by developing countries, particularly those in sub-Saharan Africa, and of course, SIDS countries. And I was wondering whether perhaps you could reconcile here that priority of multilateralism in connection with the practical challenges faced by developing countries in implementing the SDGs.
Thank you. With regards to the time, I maybe ask for short questions, but thank you, Michael, for your question. Do you want to answer directly?
Yes, with pleasure. Thanks, Michael. Yes, I just wanted to flag that we try to assume our responsibility, live up to it by supporting one visible process, the Summit of the Future, together with our partner from Namibia, but we don't do this without taking into account other processes that are ongoing, in particular the SDG process from last year. I agree with your assessment. Many people agree with your assessment that we are lagging behind and that we need to gain ground in order to push things forward and to possibly achieve the goals up to 2030. I made the point because I am aware that many people criticized the whole Summit of the Future process would be detrimental to the SDG process, and we from day one said no, it goes hand in hand. One supports the other and the other way around, and it should not be at the expense of the SDG process, for example. And when I said the summit is a visible or the most visible process in New York this year, obviously there are other processes like the one in St. John's next week, for example, that are of extreme relevance. This was not meant to disqualify anything, to the contrary. But I wanted to flag that everything that has been decided in Antigua and Barbuda next week, for example, and in many other places, should be fed into the summit process, which might serve as something like, and this is not meant literally, but like an umbrella to collect all different perspectives and bring them together and try to push our joint agenda forward. That must be the objective. And I think you also alluded to the, and that's my final comment, on the reform of the IFIs, the International Financial Institutions. I think we are all in agreement that reform is needed, and we will have to see how far we can take compromises in order to further develop that. But this is maybe not only up to the UN, but also up to the Washington-based institutions themselves, of course. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the floor? Maybe we collect. I see one question here, and maybe to save some time, we start with the two questions on the left-hand side, and then Helga, you have the final question.
Hello, I'm Bastian. Thank you very much. Florian Laude. You mentioned the connection between security and climate, and that you guys had initiatives for that. Could you expand on this concept a little bit, and what policy implications the German government sees for the connection of climate and security?
There was another question here on my left-hand side.
Hi, my name is Salvanan. My question is, how far is it realistic for a small nation to get an access to have a kind of affordable loans? Because we have spoken about access to affordable loans, because we have seen COP28, there was an endless negotiations going on for climate funds, and the industrial nation especially, they were reluctant to allot funds for that. So my question is, how far is it realistic to have an access to those funds for loans or something, given this situation?
All right, thank you. Okay, and then we take the two questions here on my right-hand side.
Well, I have a very short question to Mrs. Perrine. How successful are these big ocean states in controlling their economic zone of about 200 kilometers around them? I've heard that, for instance, Japanese fish trawlers are robbering in those waters, and they have no means, they have no police, no sea police or so to drive them out. So this is a problem. You have these big islands, this big ocean. Can you control it?
Thank you. Then there was one more question that I think we take that as a final question.
My name is Alexander Käfer. I'd like to ask a short question. I understood that much emphasis is being put on finance, climate finance. What about development cooperation in the form of sending people, in whichever form this might happen? Is this any issue at this conference or not? Thank you.
May I ask you, what do you mean by sending people? Sending people from countries like Germany to SIDS, or sending people from climate-affected SIDS to countries like Germany?
Yes, just beside the need of money for climate finance, is there also a need or let's say an issue for sending professionals in terms of technical cooperation? This, of course, can happen between SIDS, sharing their experience, could happen from Global South countries to other Global South countries, or from Global North countries to Global South countries. I just did not hear this issue. That's why I want to ask whether I'm on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you for all your questions. Florian Laudi, maybe you want to start with the question on climate and security, and maybe also can give some reference to the last question of cooperation in the field of technical assistance.
I try to be short to give the other panelists also the chance to jump in. On climate and security, I briefly mentioned it because I know that it's highly controversial within the Security Council in particular. Germany is currently not represented there, so there's very little we can achieve or do or try to achieve. But I wanted to indicate that whenever we can, we will be happy to take the issue up, because we think among the many issues in foreign climate policy, there's one element besides many others that is relevant, which is the implications of climate change on concrete security situations. Take for example, migration flows, or take also famines, if you want, or floodings, which make people move from A to B, which may cause trouble in B then, and lead to conflicts. And we as international community must take this into account when we talk about conflicts and crises. Many agree with us when it comes to concrete subject matters in one concrete country or on one concrete spot. Yes, then it's council business. We would tend with many others and say, yes, that's true, but we must do the next step. We must go one step ahead and take this as a horizontal issue and bring it to the attention of the broader audience. And a very short remark on development cooperation and technical cooperation, the last question, because you invited me, but others are probably better placed to provide answers. I think we should not exclude that. Of course, climate finance will be relevant, will be or is high on the agenda. But as for us, as the federal government, and here I'm talking a bit in the realm of the Ministry for Development Cooperation, of course we take this into account as one opportunity to support when this support is welcome. Thank you.
Florian Laudi. Stefania, maybe you want to comment on the question of how the large maritime zones are actually policed or can be controlled by small island developing states, and maybe you also want to comment on the question on technical assistance.
So one of the issues that small island states face is human resources. So we have a lack of human resources and local expertise also. So this is why capacity building is very important. So we need to build the capacity of our local resources to act like marine rangers, to be able to look at all the different corners of the EEZ zone. And this is why also we need more collaboration from other small island states, and also collaboration and partnership with funding organizations also to help boost the knowledge and the capacity of local rangers. And also, there is a need for technology transfer, which is very important. So to be able to manage the whole zone, technology is important. For example, geographical information systems. So these are much needed, and sometimes we don't have the resources because of financial constraint and lack of institutional capacity. So these are very important, and this is also technical assistance also on how to better manage the EEZ zone. So it is true. It has been all over the news sometimes that there has been, for example, piracy in the Indian Ocean, and also that countries are invading the economic zone. But human resources is very important to control all that.
Stefano, we also had this question on how realistic it is for small island states to get access to affordable loans, or maybe we can even broaden this question up a little bit, given that there's a huge focus of the SITS4 conference also on attracting private business money investments to small island developing states. How realistic is that from your point of view for small island developing states?
Well, thank you for the questions, and also from the questions from the audience. In terms of the loans, well, I like to reiterate the fact that accessing loans at a concessional rate for many seeds became a bit prohibitive because of the high interest rates that are mostly they exist because of their income level. So as soon as the income level of many of the seeds increases, then there is no access to concessional funding any longer. And this, again, notwithstanding the fact that many of the vulnerabilities remain there, and the challenges of improving infrastructure, education, any type of the resources, and including governance, has a higher cost. So this is something that, again, which has not been eloquently or comprehensively addressed by the international funding institutions. So there is still room for understanding and doing a bit better. So to answer to the question, unless there are specific funds made available by the funding institution, the international, especially the IMF and the World Bank, it will be, I think, more challenging for seeds to access such loans. I'm aware of some initiatives that are being spearheaded by the IMF and the World Bank recently, especially on funding resilience, whereby certain, let's say, concerns from the lending institutions are waived or considered, and therefore seeds might access these funds a bit more leniently. However, it has not happened, as successfully as we thought. So there is still room for doing better. I would also like to add something else about the use of the resources and the question that there was in terms of seeds being able to control or have command over a large ocean site. Well, oceans are also a resource for many seeds. Some lend part of their ocean resources to third parties in order to have an income, because either because it's an investment for them, and I would say if this is done sustainably, especially when we talk about fish and the ocean resources, I don't see anything wrong, because it's a resource like others. Like, large countries have forest and they deforestate, or they use the land-based resources in the way they deem appropriate. Why should not seeds? The fact that they cannot control because they don't have the resources to go each corner of their ocean area should not justify the fact that perhaps you should control for them, because it's a bit dangerous. But it's in an area, for example, where technical cooperation can be reinforced, and where training and perhaps exchanges of views could be strengthened in order for seeds to have a better command of controlling and perhaps even sustainably use those resources that so far maybe be not explored totally. Thank you.
Stefano, we now talked quite a bit about what countries like Germany, what the United Nations can do to support small island developing states, which of course is very, very important. But let me, as a very final question to you, Stefania, turn it a little bit around. Is there anything from your point of view that we in countries like Germany can learn from small island developing states, from islands like Rodriguez?
One word that has been used throughout the conversation is resilience. So small island states, they are quite resilient. So for years and years, we have been facing natural disasters, and we have been able to build back again. For example, in Mauritius and Rodrigues, we usually face cyclone. And for this year, we had successive cyclones which has hit both Mauritius and Rodrigues. And early in January, one of those cyclones, people even died and caused a lot of damage to the infrastructure. But we always build back when we are hit by natural disasters. For example, also during the COVID-19 pandemic, we were able to some extent, sustain our economy by looking for innovative ways. So we always, we don't look at a situation from a negative side, but we always look adverse situation and look for how we can turn things around, like you said. So I think that countries like Germany can learn to be resilient, learn that from seed, to build back from disasters, from social problems, and look for innovative ways to build back better. And also, small island states, they are a reservoir of traditional knowledge. So we always look to our traditional knowledge. We learn from what our grandparents have taught us. For example, growing fruit, and because during the pandemic, we didn't have regular transport coming from Mauritius to Rodrigues, and we were quite limited in our resources. So people are now more and more engaged into growing back their own foods, something which they used to do earlier, but you know, with modernity and changes in ways of life, so people have like changed their lifestyle. But what the pandemic has taught us, so for our food security, we need to grow our own food and not depend from what we have from abroad. So this is something that countries like Germany can learn to be resilient.
Thank you, Stefania, and thank you to all our speakers here on the panel discussion and during this event. Thank you also to you in the audience here in Berlin and joining us online. I'm really sorry that we were running so late. I think there would have been many, many more aspects to talk about more in detail, but I hope that we at least gave a glimpse of all the issues that, all the challenges that small island developing states face, and I hope that some of you maybe will be interested to get a little bit more into these issues and to give more consideration to small island developing states in future. I also would like to thank the embassies of New Zealand and the Maldives for partnering with the United Nations Association of Germany in making this event possible. Thank you very much indeed. And last but not least, also thank you to the venue, the Landesvertretung Bremen here in Berlin, and also to Zach and Caro from the technical support. I now would like to invite those of you attending us here in Berlin to a reception with food and drinks that you will find outside this room in behind of you. We have really good weather today, so please feel free to not only use this room for the get-together, but also the beautiful garden outside this room. And as a special highlight for the reception, the New Zealand Embassy has kindly provided New Zealand wine. So thank you very much, Excellency Craig Hawke, and to your team for contributing to the reception with the New Zealand wine. And once again, thank you to all of you.